So our next presentation is by Jason Lindsay. And there he is, coming up to the front with Brookstone Capital Management. And he's going to talk, he will be sharing with us paid ads on Meta. So thank you. Please help me welcome Jason.
So we're going to stay in that wealth management kind of vein for a little bit. My name is Jason Lindsay, and let me figure out. Oh, yeah. There we go. So my name is Jason Lindsay. I'm the head of marketing for Brookstone Capital Management, which is also has Brookstone Insurance Group, Brookstone Asset Management. We're a $10 billion RIA that supports really independent financial advisors, either IARs or RIAs, both of them in kind of that vein. And what we do is provide a platform, the trading, technology, investment, and then my specialty is actually the marketing side of it. And what we do is we have a program for our Brookstone advisors called the Retirement Wealth Academy. So both Retirement Wealth Academy and Retirement.tips are owned by Brookstone, and I kind of oversee both those websites. And the Retirement Wealth Academy is a platform that we use for our advisors to teach like really in-person financial education courses, local colleges, universities, even libraries, community centers, stuff like that. And then Retirement.tips is basically there's 140 blogs on there, and we use that and we promote it through webinars. So we'll run webinars for our advisors for a lead generation. But for today, we're just gonna kind of really focus on the Retirement Wealth Academy side and talk about what we're doing on Meta, really Facebook, Instagram, on really how we're optimizing those ads. What are the metrics that we're looking at to, improve cost per result? There's a lot of different metrics, and we'll go over some of those in the next couple minutes. But really, our advisors how many people can I get in front of, next Saturday or next Tuesday, next Thursday, whatever that class is. So we're going to go over a few of those, then leave time for questions at the end. So this is some of the creative that you can kind of see here. And so this year we've ran 150 campaigns. An average campaign is about 3 weeks and about $3,000 spend. And we're doing this across the country, almost all 50 states, but running these kind of Facebook campaigns. They're really short in flight. We launch them, and the class is typically about 3 weeks later. Anywhere from Social Security to taxes and retirement, estate planning, anything that kind of fits into that retirement realm is the kind of classes that we're teaching. One of our classes is what the wealthy do differently, going after that higher end segment. And so when I started, I've been there about 3 years now. When I started, the cost per result was kind of through the roof. And so what we did is we kind of looked at basically how do we decrease this, because how do we get our advisors and our agents really in front of more people? How can we bring down that cost per result so we can, at the end of the day, have more people showing up for these classes? And kind of what we did over the last basically 2 years, from Q3 of 2022 to Q3 of 2024, has brought that down by 285% by doing some of these tweaks on Facebook that we're going to go over here. But it kind of, the first thing we did though is, before we kind of get into the numbers, is really, what were the observations? Why were those campaigns 2 years ago, kind of like awful? What observations did we have with Facebook? What inferences could we make, which led to what ad buying decisions and behaviors that we could change to really kind of focus on those campaigns to bring that result down? Because I do believe most teams start at the first inference, but really the best teams don't stop at the first inference. So everyone's like, oh, it's the creative, oh, it's the copy, oh, it's the headline, and we're going to talk about those. But I really, with my team, I'm like, that's a great idea. Let's make an inference on how we can apply that to the campaigns, and then let's apply that, do the A/B test. I think everyone up here has talked about some kind of testing or A/B testing, and that's kind of what we did. We start with the observation, we move to the inference, and then we kind of made decisions and A/B tested at the end of it to the ad buying decisions. So a little bit interactive. Does anyone know how many metrics and ad terms are there in Facebook? And there's no prize, so. Did I hear a C over there? If I had a prize, you would have it. So there's 350. So challenging on the ad buying side is like, if you start at observations, you don't know if that's the one out of the 350 that's going to make a difference, or it's the 2 or the 3 or the 4. So there's a lot of trial and error that happens when you're doing any kind of media buying. And so my team we looked at cost per click, we looked at cost per CPM, we looked at ROAS, we looked at, was it the creative? And I kind of feel bad for the creatives because they always they're the first person to get blamed for anything. But was it ad spending? Do you do a daily budget versus a lifetime budget? Is it the objective? There's 5 different objectives inside of Facebook or Meta. Is it awareness? Is it leads? What's the difference between a landing page view and a click-through? So we kind of went through the cycle of what are the things that we should be looking at, and really just, moving those through to testing and making sure that we're testing the right things. And if we're going to fail fast, and then we're going to move on to the next kind of observation. And I'd say the one kind of tip is there's a ton of useless metrics out there. Northern Cross did a great job, and they're talking about the 15-second was the winner in the video. Facebook, one of the 350 is you could see how many people watched the video 95% of the way through. On a 60-second video, you're like, do you really care if the people watch 3 seconds, the last 3 seconds of the video? In our industry, that's really probably all disclosures and stuff anyway. So some of the stuff that we were looking at wasn't that, but what are the other things that kind of made sense for our campaigns? And every campaign is going to be a little bit different. Every company, every kind of industry vertical is going to be slightly different. But for us, we had to go through and figure out what are the metrics that actually mattered versus what are the metrics I'm saying are silly or kind of useless. So some of the stuff I mentioned, we took cost per click, how many clicks, to the landing page, what happened on the landing page, what was the conversions, how many impressions for registration, some of the engagement metrics, were the ads engaged, follower demographics, frequency metrics, cost per click, return on ad spend, all those kind of stuff we kind of looked at to try to get to which one actually mattered for our business and our industry. And that was really, for us, we're going to talk about frequency because that's the one for us that made the biggest difference. But I also think it's important, and I kind of shared with my team, is understanding the difference between a metric, and an analytic. A measure is really something that we counted. A metric was something that we track, and then analytic to us is the software that actually tracks that. So understanding kind of what the differences is and making sure we're all speaking the same common language. So little disclaimer before we kind of get into kind of the frequency stuff is, I fully believe if you torture data long enough, it will confess to anything. That's not my quote. That's some British economist. So what we did is we looked at all our cost per results going back for the last 2 years. And you can kind of see this is actually a screenshot of one of our campaigns that we're running or that ran. And when we first launched the campaign, we were at a $25 cost per result the first week. The second week that grew to $43. The next week that grew to $69. The fourth, which was just a few days, that's a $224 cost per result. And so I was looking at more and more of these campaigns. And I mentioned we did 150 this year. Is everyone started having we would launch a campaign, and when we target our campaigns, we're really looking at about 60,000 people within 5 to 8 miles of the venue. So we're in 55 and above. So we were looking at these campaigns and looking at this cost per result, and every week, basically 90% of our campaigns kind of follow this cadence where week 1 was great, week 2 was okay, and then week 3 and 4 kind of fell off the cliff. So we're well, obviously that's going to be a frequency thing, and it's let's see how many impressions we're doing versus how many people are we actually reaching inside the campaign objective, and really kind of dialed in to the frequency. So what we did is we took all of our campaigns and we ranked them by cost per result, 1 to 200, and then we did the same thing for frequency. What was our best performing campaigns on the frequency side, 1 through 200, and kind of scored them. And what we looked at is, so these were our top 10 best campaigns. If you look, the cost per registration is in line with the lowest frequency. So, and then on the other side of that coin, what campaigns were the worst? Our cost per result was also the highest frequency. And like, it makes sense because obviously the more people that, kind of see your ad or you've seen it 3, 4, 5 times, they're gonna kind of not register, they've seen it, they can't make it that day, they don't wanna go to that webinar for whatever reason. But what we started to do is really sort of dial into this and try to really map it out. So, those axes are, again, frequency and cost per result. And, this was last year, so the campaigns we ran last year versus the campaigns we did this year. And there was a 33% decrease in cost per result. Over the last 2 years, it's been over 200%, but really, so far last year versus this year, it's decreased by 33%. By really paying attention to, what is that frequency, what is that cost per result, and how do those two things correlate to each other? So what did we do is, one is we were just way more proactive. So when we would launch campaigns, and I mentioned like 2 or 3 years ago, the cost per result was really high, that we would look at our campaigns, and every day we go in there and are watching the cost per result. We're looking at how many people are registered for the event, and we're doing this, this year times 150. So every day, me and my team are kind of in there looking at, what's going on with registrations, what's going on with, CPRs, what's going on with frequency. And then with Facebook, we do Google ads, we do some LinkedIn. Those are basically our 3 platforms. Facebook is by far the hardest one. They constantly change. You log in there, and every day there's, something new going on. They're trying to force you into, you have to use this advantage audience, you have to do this. So what we do is try to not go against Facebook, but try to be aware of what they're trying to do versus what we're trying to do. If you just take it at face value and say hey, Facebook, just run my campaigns, that's gonna be probably problematic at some point in the future. So what we do is, when we launch a campaign, we'll put multiple ad sets on there. And, our biggest thing that we found was, so going back to our audiences was the 60,000 around the venue, 5 to 10 miles from the venue. Is Facebook, if we do a leads objective or a sales objective, it would only serve to 20, 25,000 out of the 60,000. So what we're trying to do is map how many people are actually in that audience versus how many people, Facebook is using the reach for. And then if we watch the reach once again, and then watch the frequency as that kind of bubbles up, we'll turn off that ad and relaunch it, even if it's 3 or 4 days, because we'll get a better result. And we've kind of, mapped this out and been studying this is, if I would rather relaunch a campaign with 4 days left than to let the campaign run out, in the first one, because we'll get more results when the campaign launches, the second time around. So what we're constantly doing is turning off ads, turning on ad sets, turning off ad sets within a campaign, and it is a lot of work, for me and my team. But we see a drastically difference when we kind of, basically don't let Facebook do what they're gonna do, because they always say hey, you need 50 events, 50 conversion events in the first week to come out of learning or limited learning. So what we're trying to do is kind of combat some of the stuff that Facebook is telling us that we should do. The other thing is really, targeting new audiences. I mentioned that earlier that, leads is the audience, sales is the audience, and there's different campaign objectives, and trying to figure out, how can we go fishing in other areas, and how can we, if there's really 60,000 people within, 2-3 miles of here, and Facebook's only serving 30,000, how can we reach that other 30,000? Do we have to completely turn off the campaign? Do we have to switch it to a different objective to kind of force Facebook to, reach more people and keep that frequency down? So just a couple final thoughts. It's been a common theme today is really test, whether it's A/B testing in the Facebook platform, whether it's coming up with your own, kind of observations and inferences. But testing is always important because of going back, there's 350 different metrics in Facebook that you can kind of report out on. Some of those are going to make a huge difference in your business, and some of them are going to be what we call useless and silly. 95% of somebody that watches the video is probably not going to make a difference, but understanding, the frequency of how often your ads are run and where they're run, that probably will make a difference. And then Facebook changes constantly. There's no other platform, I don't know if this is true, but we're gonna say it, that it's the most dynamic, and I feel like they're getting better and better, but there's more changes with Facebook happening on a daily, if not weekly basis. So understanding what changes between day to day and week to week, it'll be kind of paramount to your campaigns and your performance going forward. So we have time left over, so if there's questions, where's my microphones? So this one is stuff we were looking. So this is the stuff that we just looked at. So we looked at cost per click. We looked at understanding what the difference between a landing page visit and a click, and because Facebook scores those a little bit differently. So what we were trying to do is, for us, it was frequency. But there was a lot of other stuff we looked at before we got there, or in kind of parallel. We did look at CPM. We looked at cost per click, and understanding but those never really moved the needle much on the cost per registration or the cost per result. So for us, it was we probably looked at a majority of these. We didn't look at follower demographics. We didn't look at some of the engagement stuff because we're more top of funnel and trying to get people into fill out a form and create a lead. So we do all our own media buying, so we do it in-house. So it was a lot of trial and error, and I'll probably say it's more error than trial. But absolutely, we kind of we'd come up, we'd have weekly meetings and say hey, what, because we wouldn't survive, and this program wouldn't survive, and some of those cost per results that we had 2 years ago. So we were really trying to dial into how do we get this cost per registration or cost per result down, 50%, and we started, kind of uncovering every rock. And at the end of the day, is for us, we landed on frequency, but we went through 4, 5, 6, 7 stuff before that.
Hi, my name is Holly Piper.
Yep.
I'm just curious, how did you figure out how to prioritize looking at the frequency and testing based on frequency versus relying on Meta's optimization algorithm, where they kind of can automate, which creatives are performing better versus another, when you guys, at least from my understanding, are kind of taking the lens of doing that more manually with looking at the frequency?
Yeah. Can we get this? There we go. So it was really, for us, it was this. It was looking at what was happening week over week. One of the breakdowns, one of those 350 I mentioned was, you can do it by day or by week. One of the things that we tried, and that was an error, was, day partying and stuff like that. Because a lot of our registrations come Friday after 6 p.m. through basically Monday morning. So obviously people are not working, they're on the weekend, so we were like, let's do day partying. Let's only run ads Friday through Monday, or, after 6 o'clock and that. So that was one of the things that we tried that really didn't yield a lot of return. But then we started looking at a breakdown by per week, and we started seeing this. So we started seeing well, look at the first week, because at the bottom is actually the first week, and then the top is actually the last week, or the last few days in this one. So we're look at the registrations, and we looked at one campaign, then we looked at 2 campaigns, then we looked at 10 campaigns, and it was a common theme across the board where, our registration would just spike up, week 2, week 3. And then it goes back to the audience where, Facebook was telling us that we had an audience of 60,000 people, but the reach was only 25,000 people, and we're kind of WTF? What's going on here? And why can't I get to those other, 36,000 people? So what we started doing was, like I said, turning off ad sets and then launching it to try to reach those other people. And it seemed to work. So we kind of got stuck on frequency. We've seen great results from it. And so we're kind of that's the one that mattered to us. Everyone's gonna be a little bit different. I know there's a lot of different types of companies in here, but for us, we're trying to get people to fill out a form. And for us, it was the frequency. It was that was the one that we kind of landed on. I saw 2 over here.
Thanks for the presentation. Just a question I have on mid to down funnel. So I know you're targeting registrations here, but what does the process look like to convert that prospect to a client?
So for us, we work with independent advisors. We have about 750 IRs, RAs, whatever. They show up, they teach the course. Are you from here? So we do courses like Elmhurst University, College of DuPage, like out in Naperville, Marine Valley. There's a bunch going on. So it's really up for our advisor to take the lead, convert it to an appointment, take the appointment, convert it to a client. We do have, once the registration happens, is we provide name, address, phone number, and email address. But we started working with a third-party company that's actually owned by Fidelity to kind of fill in some of those other gaps that talks about investable assets and other stuff. And now we just started with them recently, and we're excited about that too, because now we're gonna know what, if you're an advisor and you're teaching one of these classes, who in the room has money. So that's gonna be kind of helping us with their kind of close ratio. But that's, right now we're just basically providing, people to show up to the room. I saw another one over here, too.
With the focus on meta and frequency, did you notice that your presence on Facebook specifically, like follower count, engagement, affected these numbers at all? Or was it really just about the metric and how you set up the ads themselves?
Absolutely. So when we started running more ads, and for us, it was a little bit different where we're seeing more success in the program, so more advisors coming into the program, and just kind of organically, it's kind of happening, kind of not behind the scenes, but more people are seeing our ads, more people are following us. We're being more active on organic posting through, especially Instagram. We barely had an Instagram presence, but the one thing that was a huge shock to our advisors, and our advisors, they skew a little bit older. We were from 10% registrations through Instagram 2 years ago. Now we're over 30% of our registrations are coming through Instagram. And to tell that story to, a little bit more of a senior advisor, he's like, what's Facebook? And those are the conversations we're having, but we're seeing more and more kind of organic growth and kind of, the whole tide's kind of lifting because we're doing more campaigns in front of more people.
Yeah, so you say you're bringing Fidelity in now. So is there a future in this program where you would track not just the registrations in the program, but also the conversions of students and then ultimately AUM?
Yep.
So you could make sure the advisors get the
That's exactly why you brought in Fidelity.
Yeah.
So what we're doing, it's an API into one of their programs or one of their companies that they have, and it basically matches, registration data, which is name, address, phone number, email, with their kind of online, and it's data modeling. It's, but they break back 40 different data points, but some of those data points are, investable assets, a score, how likely you are to seek financial advice. And then there's a bunch of other stuff too, like household hobbies and stuff like that. But for our advisors, it's really, they're excited because when you show up to each class and we do lookalike, Brookstone has 50,000 clients. We're like, hey, Facebook, go find more clients that look like this. But I think this API that we're working with Fidelity is going to really take us to the next level and saying hey, this person has, $3.5 million and, they're QCD eligible. So that's going to be more impactful for our advisor, and hopefully, that spills over into close ratios and stuff like that.
So you've talked multiple times about frequency. I was curious on these, 3 touch points. Are you seeing a drop as far as creative fatigue? Because are you using the same creative on all 3 touch points and then past that, or are you doing 3 different pieces of creative on those touch points?
So we're doing multiple creative. So if you're into Facebook and the platform, they're dynamic creative, DCO, and they change the names And one of the things that changes, you load in 10 different creatives, and they kind of pick which one goes to which person. But what we'll do is we'll do some single image, some video. We'll use we'll take them at their word and give them the 10 images through dynamic creative optimization. But we're doing multiple creative through multiple ad sets, and that's exactly one thing we're looking at is saying like, hey, like if we see this ad, for us we've tested different creative, and that was part of the trial and error process. And for us, venue was more important than the stock photo of the couple, or we've all seen the gray haired lady. Like we've all seen that stuff. So we absolutely test that. But for us, it's trying to get a venue. Y'all know what I'm talking about. For us, it's really get a venue or a landmark image, and then we take the creative and do different versions of it and stuff like that. But it's something we pay attention to based on how the campaign's performing or not. I think that's it. All right, thank you.